I'm drinking my morning coffee when 3 police cruisers come screaming up my driveway, sirens blaring, dust clouds choking the morning air with the stench of burning brake pads. The lead officer jumps out, hand on his weapon. "Sir, step away from the structure. We have reports of illegal squatting and drug activity." Drug activity? I'm a 45-year-old tech consultant building a weekend cabin on my own land. "Ma'am," the officer yells to someone behind him, "is this the vagrant you reported?" That's when she steps out. Vivian Blackwood, designer hiking boots that have never seen dirt. Perfect makeup at 6 a.m. The HOA president who's been making my life hell for 6 months. "Officer, I told you he's dangerous. He's been threatening our community." I set down my coffee and smile. "Vivian, you just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic little power trip life. What would you do if some HOA busybody tried to have you arrested on your own property? Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and what's your worst neighbor horror story? Let me back up and tell you how I got into this mess. 6 months ago, I was Marcus Thornfield, burned-out tech consultant, drowning in a nasty divorce and 30-hour work weeks. Then my grandfather died and left me something I never expected. 40 acres of pristine mountain valley in Riverside County that he'd bought for peanuts back in 1962. Everyone thought Grandpa Joe was crazy buying land 2 hours from Los Angeles with no electricity and bears for neighbors, but turns out crazy like a fox runs in the family. This valley sits tucked between mountain ridges like God's own secret hideaway, with pine trees that make you dizzy looking up and a creek that babbles year-round. The air tastes so clean it makes your lungs forget what smog feels like. I decided to build a modest off-grid cabin using solar panels, composting toilet, and reclaimed barn wood. Nothing fancy, just a place where a man can remember who he used to be before lawyers and emails destroyed his soul. That's when the gravel crunches under expensive wheels. Vivian Blackwood arrives in a white Escalade so pristine you could eat off the bumper, wearing hiking boots that cost more than most car payments, and that fake friendly smile that screams, "I want to speak to your manager." She's got perfect makeup at 8 a.m., and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no in her entire privileged life. "This eyesore violates our community standards," she announces like she's reading corporate policy. "You need proper permits." I show her my building permits, all properly stamped and approved, and explain that my land predates her HOA subdivision by 60 years, which means I'm outside their jurisdiction entirely. Her smile turns sharp as a paper cut. "We'll see about that. This valley has standards now." The smell of her designer perfume clashes with pine sap and sawdust like oil on water, and I realize she's everything wrong with modern America. Fake, entitled, and absolutely convinced her opinion matters more than property rights. Here's what I didn't know yet. Vivian wasn't just some busybody HOA president. She was former city council, the kind of woman who collects power like stamps, and she had big plans for my valley that didn't include a scruffy tech guy building where her friends couldn't see it. 3 days later, I wake up to a stop work order nailed to my cabin door from an anonymous complaint claiming I was building without permits. The county inspector admitted he'd never seen my property, just responded to the complaint, but of course all my permits were valid and work could continue. The message was clear, though. We can make your life hell anytime we want. That's when I started finding survey stakes moved overnight. My property line markers mysteriously shifted to create confusion about boundaries. Someone had been trespassing on my land, messing with legal markers, trying to blur the lines between my property and their precious HOA territory. I installed security cameras that weekend, best investment I ever made, because what I caught on film over the next few weeks would make your blood boil. But here's the thing about being the grandson of a man who carved a homestead from wilderness with nothing but grit and determination. Marcus Thornfield, the burned-out tech consultant, might have rolled over and taken it, but Marcus Thornfield, the inheritor of 40 acres and a family legacy of not backing down from bullies, that Marcus was just getting started, and Vivian Blackwood had no idea what she'd just stepped in. Within 2 weeks, Vivian escalates from passive-aggressive notes to full psychological warfare. She organizes an emergency HOA meeting about what she calls a vagrant encampment threatening community safety, spreading rumors that I'm mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. The woman gets 3 neighbors to sign a formal complaint claiming my unsanitary conditions are contaminating their precious property values, then files a nuisance claim with the county health department complete with photos she took while trespassing on my land. The smell of her cheap hairspray lingers in my cabin for hours after her inspection. My counterpunch starts with high-definition security cameras positioned around my property perimeter, capturing every trespasser and every mysteriously moved survey stake. While she's playing politician, I'm doing detective work, and what I discover about Vivian Blackwood makes my pulse quicken with anticipation. Our HOA president has a history of ethics violations from her city council days, $60,000 in taxpayer money steered to friends and relatives. Plus, her precious HOA was formed without proper environmental impact studies, which in California is like performing surgery without a medical license. But here's the mini twist that changes the entire game. While researching property boundaries, I discover that Vivian's new swimming pool, the one she's been bragging about on social media for 3 months, was built 6 feet onto my property. The concrete contractors never checked the original survey markers, just relied on the HOA's incorrect boundary maps. Every time she takes her morning swim, she's literally trespassing in my backyard, and I have the original 1962 county survey to prove it. During my divorce, I'd learned the hard way that property rights come in different flavors. My ex-wife's attorney had tried claiming easement rights to our shared driveway, but my lawyer explained that easements only give limited access, like letting utility companies run power lines. Fee simple ownership, what I have here, means total control. You own the dirt, the air above it, and everything underneath, which is why I can legally tell Vivian to drain her pool and move it off my land. The expensive lesson from my divorce settlement was worth every penny. Always check original county records because developers will fudge boundary lines to maximize lot sales. Vivian's response to my newfound confidence is predictably desperate. She hires private security to patrol HOA boundaries, and these rent-a-cops start questioning my visitors like we're living in some gated prison community. They demand identification from anyone bringing supplies to my cabin, file anonymous complaints about commercial vehicle traffic every time my contractor friends show up. And Danny, my main builder, reports that security guards are photographing license plates and actively intimidating workers with threats about trespassing violations. The escalation reaches its peak when one of her security guards blocks my driveway with his vehicle and smugly informs me that I need visitor passes for my own property. The crunch of gravel under his boots as he approaches my truck sounds like nails on a chalkboard, and his cologne reeks of desperation mixed with Dollar General aftershave. HOA has community safety standards that apply to everyone in the valley, he explains like he's reciting from a manual written by someone who failed civics class. I filmed the entire interaction, making sure to capture his power-drunk expression when he explains that a private security guard can control access to property he doesn't own, has never owned, and will never own. The video goes viral within 24 hours, 50,000 views, and hundreds of comments from people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Anti-HOA communities on Reddit pick it up, property rights advocates share it everywhere, and suddenly my little valley dispute becomes a symbol of everything wrong with petty tyrants drunk on imaginary authority. The comments are brutal and beautiful. This is exactly why I'll never buy in an HOA. Sue them into bankruptcy. And my personal favorite, that guard looks like he peaked in high school, and this is the most power he's ever had. More importantly, I start getting private messages from other Valley residents who've been quietly suffering under Vivian's reign of terror, people afraid to speak up because they thought they were alone. Meanwhile, Vivian doubles down on stupid. She posts on Nextdoor about the dangerous hermit threatening community safety, organizes safety patrols with 3 other board members who apparently have nothing better to do than drive around looking for violations, and files complaints with the fire marshal about my illegal burn pile, which is actually a properly permitted brush clearing operation required by county fire codes. But here's what she doesn't realize. Every harassment attempt is being documented, every trespassing incident recorded in high definition, and every false complaint filed with my attorney. The sound of autumn leaves crunching under my boots during late-night evidence gathering has become strangely therapeutic, like the footsteps of justice approaching one piece of proof at a time. Because Vivian Blackwood just made a critical tactical error. She escalated a property dispute into a public relations war against someone with a viral video, documented evidence of her corruption, and legal proof that she's been swimming in my backyard for 3 months without permission. Game on, lady. Game on. Vivian's next move proves she's either completely delusional or operating on pure spite. She launches a full media campaign, creating Nextdoor posts about the dangerous hermit living in our peaceful valley, complete with photos of my cabin taken from the road with zoom lenses. She organizes what she calls a safety patrol with 3 other HOA board members, Karen, Susan, and Janet, because of course those are their names, who drive around in matching white SUVs looking for violations like some suburban Gestapo. Then she files complaints with the fire marshal about my illegal burn pile, which is actually a properly permitted brush clearing operation that the county fire department requires every property owner to maintain. My strategic response starts with hiring Patricia Chen, an environmental lawyer who specializes in water rights and has a reputation for making developers cry in court. While Patricia begins a comprehensive land survey, I discover something that makes my grandfather's 1962 land purchase look like the deal of the century. His mineral rights include gravel extraction privileges, and there's enough construction aggregate under my property to pave half of Riverside County. More importantly, I file counter-complaints about HOA harassment and trespassing, creating an official paper trail that will haunt Vivian in court. But here's the mini-twist that turns this whole game upside down. Patricia's research reveals that the HOA's developer never owned water extraction rights when they built Hillcrest Estates. The entire subdivision relies on well water that comes from my aquifer, flowing under my property from the mountain springs. They've been illegally tapping my groundwater for 3 years without permission, easement, or compensation. Every toilet flush, every swimming pool fill, every sprinkler system in their precious subdivision is stealing water that legally belongs to me. My tech background had taught me about server architecture and data flow, but water rights operate on similar principles. Everything flows from the source, and whoever controls the source controls the system. During one late-night research session, I'd stumbled across California riparian law, which basically means that if water flows under your land, you own it, and anyone tapping that water without permission is committing theft. The legal precedent goes back to Spanish colonial law, and it supersedes pretty much every HOA covenant ever written. Community dynamics start shifting as word spreads about the illegal water tapping. Danny, my contractor, reveals that Vivian's husband tried bribing him with a county road contract if he'd refuse to work on my cabin. Rosa, who owns the local feed store, mentions that Vivian threatened to organize an HOA boycott if businesses continued serving me. The Valley old-timers remember my grandfather fondly and start sharing stories about how he used to help neighbors during droughts by sharing his well water for free. There's a growing us versus them mentality developing between the newcomers who bought into Vivian's fantasy and the established residents who remember what community actually means. Vivian's escalation reaches new levels of petty tyranny when she attempts to get my building permits retroactively revoked by claiming I never disclosed the cabin to the Environmental Protection Agency. She files a formal complaint with the state claiming my septic system is contaminating groundwater. Ironic, considering she's been stealing that same groundwater for years. She spreads rumors that I'm operating some kind of illegal business from my cabin and threatens local suppliers with HOA boycotts if they continue delivering materials to my property. The physical confrontation builds when Vivian's security patrol blocks a delivery of solar batteries, leaving 2,000 pounds of equipment sitting on the county road in 95-degree heat. The sheriff gets called for a public safety hazard, and I'm forced to hand-load industrial batteries while sweat stings my eyes and the smell of hot asphalt makes breathing feel like sucking exhaust fumes. The texture of rope burns on my hands from moving equipment without proper crew becomes a daily reminder of how far Vivian will go to make my life miserable. But every harassment attempt is being documented. My security cameras capture her patrol members trespassing to photograph my septic system. I record phone conversations with county officials who admit they're getting daily complaints about my property from the same person. My attorney files each false complaint as evidence of a systematic harassment campaign designed to force me off my legally owned land. The sound of Vivian's voice carries across the valley during her safety patrols, sharp and entitled as fingernails on chalkboard. She's got that particular brand of suburban outrage that comes from never being denied anything, and the growing desperation in her tone tells me she's starting to realize this isn't going according to her plan. Because here's what Vivian Blackwood doesn't understand. She just declared war on someone who owns the water supply for her entire subdivision, has documentation of 3 years of theft, and access to enough construction aggregate to make her husband's business irrelevant. She wanted to play hardball, but she brought a plastic bat to a professional game. Time to show her what real power looks like. Vivian's legal warfare kicks into overdrive when she hires Thompson & Associates, a downtown law firm that charges more per hour than most people make in a week. They file an injunction against my construction, claiming my cabin violates Valley aesthetic standards. Apparently, rustic log construction offends their sensibilities more than McMansions with fake Tudor facades. She attempts to get historical preservation status for the area, which would freeze all development except for projects that meet her approval, and files a homestead exemption challenge on my property taxes, trying to claim I don't actually live here full-time. My research deep dive reveals corruption that makes Watergate look like a parking ticket. The HOA's formation documents contain 17 different legal errors, including failure to notify 3 property owners who should have been included in the original covenants. Several families never received proper legal notification when the HOA was formed, which means the entire organization lacks authority over properties that predate the subdivision. Even better, Vivian personally profited from development contracts by steering landscaping work to her brother's company at inflated prices. But here's the shocking mini-twist that changes everything. Patricia's geological survey reveals massive gravel deposits worth an estimated $2.3 million sitting directly under my property. The irony is delicious. Vivian's husband's construction company, Blackwood Enterprises, desperately needs aggregate for their county infrastructure projects, and they've been trying to force me out to access mineral rights they could never legally obtain. Their harassment campaign wasn't about property values or community standards. It was about stealing my inheritance to fund their business empire. I'd learned about mineral rights the hard way during my grandfather's estate settlement. The probate attorney had explained that federal homestead grants from the 1960s often included subsurface rights that modern property owners don't even realize they have. These rights supersede local zoning laws, HOA covenants, and pretty much every municipal ordinance because they're backed by federal authority. Most people sell their homes without ever knowing they're sitting on valuable resources, but my grandfather had been smart enough to retain every right the government offered. Community polarization reaches a breaking point as 3 Valley families receive HOA violation notices immediately after publicly supporting my right to build. The local cafe owner gets pressured to ban me from the breakfast counter where I've been eating for 6 months. Anonymous flyers appear throughout the valley claiming I attract undesirable elements, which apparently means anyone who doesn't drive a luxury SUV and worship at the altar of property values. Valley residents are forced to choose sides publicly, and the divisions are getting uglier by the day. Vivian's sabotage campaign escalates to actual property damage when my solar panels mysteriously get damaged during a windstorm that somehow missed every other structure in the valley. A surprise septic inspection reveals another anonymous complaint about illegal dumping, forcing me to pay for emergency pumping services on a system that's functioning perfectly. The county fire marshal receives concerned citizen reports about my burn permits, and my internet provider cancels service due to customer complaints about my account. My silent preparation involves installing military-grade security cameras with night vision capabilities and motion sensors that can detect a rabbit at 50 yards. I begin documenting every HOA violation of proper legal procedures, building a case file that would make a federal prosecutor jealous. I contact Sarah Martinez, an investigative journalist from Channel 7 who specializes in municipal corruption stories, and secretly meet with 3 other property owners who've been harassed by Vivian's gang of suburban terrorists. The dramatic incident that pushes me over the edge happens when I return from a supply run to find Vivian's security patrol had attempted to enter my cabin while I was away. Security cameras capture 2 guards trying to jimmy my front door lock, claiming later they were checking for code violations on private property they have no authority to inspect. I return to find scratches around the deadbolt, my personal items disturbed, and boot prints on my front porch that match the guards' tactical footwear. The emotional low point hits me while I'm sitting in my grandfather's chair, looking at his photo on the mantle and questioning whether this fight is worth the constant stress. Part of me considers selling the property and moving somewhere quieter, maybe Montana or Idaho where people mind their own business. But seeing that weathered face in the photograph reminds me that he didn't clear this land and build his legacy so his grandson could run away from the first bully who showed up with lawyers and fake authority. The smell of pine sap and wood smoke fills my cabin as I make the decision that will define everything that comes next. I'm not just fighting for my property anymore. I'm fighting for every person who's ever been pushed around by petty tyrants who mistake HOA positions for real power. Vivian Blackwood wants to play games with someone's family legacy. Time to teach her that some games have consequences she never saw coming. The game-changing discovery comes on a Tuesday morning when Patricia calls me with news that makes my coffee taste like victory. She's found something in the federal archives that changes everything. My grandfather's 1961 land grant wasn't just a simple property purchase. It was issued under Homestead Act provisions that include complete mineral rights to the entire 400-acre valley floor. Not just my 40 acres, the whole damn valley. The legal implications hit like a freight train loaded with justice. Any construction affecting groundwater in this valley requires my permission, which means Hillcrest Estates was built without proper mineral rights clearance. The HOA's water wells are technically illegal without easement agreements that were never negotiated, never signed, and never recorded. I can legally restrict access to all gravel deposits under their precious neighborhood, and every foundation, every driveway, every sidewalk in their subdivision sits on aggregate I own. During my corporate days, I'd seen plenty of contracts with buried clauses that could make or break million-dollar deals. Federal homestead grants operate the same way. They include rights that supersede every local ordinance written since. The expensive legal education from my divorce had taught me that original federal land grants trump state law, county zoning, and especially HOA covenants. These rights don't expire, don't transfer unless specifically deeded, and can't be revoked by local authorities who weren't even born when the grants were issued. But here's the strategic revelation that makes everything click into place. Vivian's husband's construction company submitted a bid for an $1.8 million county road project that requires 50,000 tons of gravel from valley deposits. They need my mineral rights to fulfill that contract, and the timeline matches perfectly with when their harassment campaign began 3 years ago. This was never about cabin aesthetics or property values. It was a systematic campaign to acquire my mineral rights through intimidation, hoping to force a below-market sale before I discovered what I actually owned. The power dynamic shifts completely as I realize I'm holding all the legal cards. I can shut down the HOA's water access immediately if I choose, controlling the literal lifeblood of their subdivision. I control access to over $2 million in mineral resources that their entire business plan depends on. Every piece of harassment, every false complaint, every trespassing incident has been documented in high definition, creating an evidence file that prosecutors dream about. My emotional transformation is complete. I'm no longer the defensive victim trying to build a peaceful cabin retreat. I'm the strategic opponent with federal law backing my every move, and Vivian's harassment campaign has given me legal grounds for everything from civil rights violations to criminal conspiracy charges. My grandfather's legacy isn't just 40 acres of mountain property. It's a responsibility to protect this valley from people who think wealth and connections can override federal law. The community support aspect becomes crucial as I realize this fight affects everyone in the valley. 3 elderly residents have been harassed with bogus property maintenance violations. Local businesses have been threatened with boycotts for serving me. Valley families are being forced to choose between supporting their neighbor and avoiding HOA retaliation. This isn't just about my cabin anymore, it's about whether communities will be controlled by elected officials accountable to residents or by self-appointed tyrants accountable to nobody. Patricia explains that we could settle this privately, take a cash payment, and walk away quietly, but that would leave every other valley resident vulnerable to the same tactics, and it would dishonor everything my grandfather built here. The decision crystallizes with perfect clarity. We're going public, exposing the corruption, and making sure Vivian Blackwood's name becomes synonymous with HOA overreach in legal textbooks, because sometimes the right thing to do and the satisfying thing to do are exactly the same thing. Time to show this valley what justice looks like when federal law meets small-town corruption. Legal team assembly begins with Patricia bringing in Jerome Washington, a civil rights attorney who specializes in harassment and discrimination cases and has a track record of making bullies pay for their behavior in both criminal court and civil settlements. The local prosecutor's office shows immediate interest when Patricia presents evidence of HOA corruption, and County Supervisor Maria Santos agrees to support a full investigation into improper development permits and water rights violations. The smell of fresh legal briefs and highlighter ink fills Patricia's conference room as we spread out 3 years of documented evidence across a table that's seen its share of David versus Goliath battles. Community coalition building happens faster than I expected as people realize they're not alone in suffering under Vivian's reign of terror. Danny reveals that the HOA demanded kickbacks for contractor referrals, threatening to blacklist any builder who refused to pay their administrative fees. Rosa documents threats against businesses that support me, including anonymous calls warning about HOA boycotts and permit challenges. 3 elderly residents come forward with stories of harassment over property maintenance violations that include citations for having dandelions in their yards and parking their 20-year-old trucks in their own driveways instead of garages. Evidence compilation becomes a full-time job as we organize over 200 hours of security footage showing trespassing, harassment, and property damage. HOA financial records reveal systematic overspending on legal fees and private security, with invoices that suggest Vivian's been using community funds to finance her personal vendetta against me. County permit applications contain false information about water sources and environmental impact, and email chains obtained through discovery show coordination between Vivian and her husband's construction company to manipulate the development approval process. Strategic planning sessions reveal that we're not just building a legal case, we're orchestrating a public education campaign about HOA abuse and property rights. The team decides to expose corruption publicly rather than settle privately, understanding that a quiet settlement would leave other residents vulnerable to the same tactics. We plan a coordinated response involving media coverage, county officials, and valley residents, timing everything to coincide with the HOA's annual assembly, where all the dirty laundry gets aired in front of cameras and witnesses. My corporate background in project management proves invaluable as we coordinate multiple moving parts like a military operation. I agree to implement a temporary water access restriction to demonstrate my legal authority over the subdivision's water supply, giving residents a taste of what life looks like when someone actually enforces property rights. The timeline gets synchronized with county board meetings and HOA proceedings to maximize public impact and media coverage. Technical preparation involves a professional geological survey that confirms $2.8 million in extractable gravel deposits under my property, water flow analysis proving the HOA wells depend entirely on my aquifer, and environmental impact studies showing that Hillcrest Estates development violated watershed protection regulations. Legal title searches reveal 3 other properties in the valley with similar homestead rights, meaning Vivian's authority is even more limited than she realizes. During one late-night planning session, Patricia explains the discovery process in civil litigation, which basically means we get to demand every document, email, and financial record related to HOA operations. Courts prefer contemporaneous records over testimony because people lie, but documents don't, which is why my obsessive documentation of every harassment incident becomes the foundation of our case. We also research mineral rights versus surface rights, discovering that federal homestead mineral rights supersede state and local zoning authority, giving me legal powers that most property owners never even know exist. Media strategy coordination brings Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 on board for the HOA corruption angle, and we develop a social media campaign to document harassment of Valley residents in real time. The county transparency advocate agrees to attend the HOA meeting as an official observer, and we arrange for live streaming the final confrontation to prevent intimidation tactics and ensure everything happens in the public eye. Psychological preparation becomes crucial as Patricia coaches me on public speaking, helping me translate complex legal concepts into everyday language that cameras and courtrooms can understand. We rehearse key talking points, practice handling Vivian's personal attacks and deflection tactics, and build confidence through community support and ironclad legal backing. The sound of my voice getting stronger and more confident during practice sessions tells me I'm ready for whatever Vivian throws at me. Final logistics include briefing the county sheriff about potential confrontation at the HOA meeting, arranging media credentials for public portions of proceedings, and preparing water restriction notices for immediate service. Cease and desist orders targeting the security patrol and harassment campaigns sit ready for delivery, and restraining orders wait for signatures to protect Valley residents from retaliation. The taste of anticipation mixes with morning coffee as I realize we're not just fighting for my cabin anymore. We're taking down a corrupt system that's been terrorizing this entire community for 3 years. Time to show Vivian Blackwood what happens when federal law meets small-town tyranny. Vivian's desperate measures reach new heights of absurdity when she attempts to fast-track an emergency HOA vote to assess special fees of $15,000 per household, claiming the money is needed to fund an extended legal battle against my environmental terrorism. She plans to use resident fees to bankroll her personal vendetta, spreading rumors about my mental health and potential for violence to anyone who'll listen. Her coordination with county commissioners involves claiming that my cabin is causing environmental contamination, complete with fabricated photos of polluted creek water that any scientist could debunk in 5 minutes. My water restriction bombshell hits the subdivision like a sledgehammer to their entitled worldview. I serve legal notice restricting HOA well access with 30 days notice, citing illegal use of mineral rights and 3 years of unauthorized water theft. The panic spreads through Hillcrest Estates faster than wildfire as residents realize their morning showers, swimming pools, and perfectly manicured lawns depend entirely on water they don't own. Local news covers the story with the headline, "Valley Landowner Cuts Off HOA Water Access." And suddenly every homeowner in the subdivision is Googling water rights and mineral ownership at 2 a.m. Community reaction splits the valley down the middle as an emergency HOA meeting gets called to address what Vivian dramatically calls the water crisis. Residents demand answers about development permits and water rights that their real estate agents never mentioned, and 3 families file lawsuits against the HOA for misrepresentation and failure to disclose water dependency. Property values in Hillcrest Estates drop 15% within 2 weeks as potential buyers discover the water supply situation, and suddenly Vivian's obsession with property values becomes her own worst nightmare. Vivian's sabotage escalation turns criminal when anonymous 911 calls start reporting suspicious activity at my cabin every time a delivery truck arrives. She attempts to get my contractor licenses revoked through false complaints claiming I'm operating without permits, and hires a private investigator to dig up personal dirt about my divorce and financial situation. Social media rumors spread claiming my cabin attracts undesirable elements, which apparently means anyone who believes in property rights and constitutional law. My silent countermoves operate like a well-oiled intelligence operation as I file formal complaints with the state attorney general about HOA corruption, providing evidence packages to the county grand jury investigation that's been quietly building for months. I begin preliminary discussions with gravel extraction companies about fair market contracts that would generate sustainable revenue for valley improvements, while giving Vivian's husband's company exactly 0 access to resources they tried to steal. The attempted bribery happens on a Thursday evening when Vivian requests a private meeting to discuss our mutual interests. She arrives at my cabin in her pristine Escalade wearing a business suit that probably costs more than most people's monthly rent, and the smell of her desperation mingles with expensive perfume like oil spilling into clean water. Her offer is almost insulting. $400,000 cash for mineral rights and water easements worth over $2 million, claiming that HOA residents will suffer without a water access deal and implying that county contracts could make me wealthy if I cooperate with their theft. My public response comes in the form of security footage showing Vivian's bribery attempt, which I release with a social media video explaining how she tried to buy stolen water rights for 20 cents on the dollar. I point out that my water restriction is a temporary demonstration of legal authority and commit to reasonable water access agreements once the harassment stops and proper easements get negotiated through legitimate legal channels. Media attention peaks as regional newspapers pick up the story about David versus Goliath in the California mountains. Environmental groups support my watershed protection stance, and anti-HOA advocacy organizations offer legal support from across the country. The story gets shared in national property rights forums, generating over 100,000 views and turning my little valley dispute into a symbol of resistance against HOA overreach. Physical intimidation escalates with strange vehicles patrolling my property at night, construction equipment vandalized with spray-painted threats, and anonymous letters left at my cabin door containing language that would make a sailor blush. Local businesses report pressure to refuse service to me, with Vivian supporters threatening boycotts and permit challenges against anyone who doesn't join their campaign of economic harassment. Community support response mobilizes like a neighborhood watch program on steroids as Valley residents organize volunteer security patrols for my property. Local businesses publicly support me with window signs, and a crowdfunding campaign raises $15,000 for legal expenses within 48 hours. 3 county supervisors attend a Valley community meeting where residents share stories of HOA harassment and abuse that would shock anyone who still believes in American freedom. The sound of gravel crunching under the tires of patrol vehicles becomes a nightly reminder that Vivian's desperation is reaching dangerous levels. But every escalation attempt is being documented, every threat recorded, and every act of retaliation filed as evidence in a federal case that's growing stronger by the day. Because Vivian Blackwood just learned what happens when you bring suburban entitlement to a federal law fight. Vivian's smear campaign reaches social media with the creation of fake accounts designed to spread rumors that I'm an environmental extremist trying to stop all development in the valley. Posts appear claiming my cabin violates septic and water safety regulations. complete with doctored photos showing contamination that any environmental scientist could debunk in minutes. She organizes a concerned citizens petition to the county health department with 57 signatures, most of them from people who've never set foot in our valley but somehow have strong opinions about my property management. My legal offensive launches like a precision missile strike when Patricia files defamation lawsuits against Vivian personally, requesting expedited hearings on harassment and intimidation charges that carry both criminal and civil penalties. We provide evidence of fake social media accounts traced back to IP addresses registered to HOA board members, along with documented false complaints that show a clear pattern of systematic harassment. The county prosecutor opens a criminal investigation into HOA financial irregularities after discovering that community funds have been used to pay for private attorneys pursuing personal vendettas. The shocking discovery that changes everything comes when our private investigator reveals that Vivian has embezzled $180,000 from HOA funds over 3 years, using the money for personal legal expenses, security contracts, and what appears to be a home renovation project that somehow got classified as community improvements. The HOA treasurer, Margaret Winters, helped cover up missing funds by creating false invoices and backdated contracts. 3 years of financial records show systematic fraud that makes Bernie Madoff look like a small-time pickpocket. During my corporate consulting days, I'd seen plenty of financial fraud, but HOA embezzlement operates on a special level of arrogance because board members assume residents won't scrutinize community finances. Patricia explains that HOA board members can be held personally liable for misusing community funds, facing both criminal charges and civil restitution that can include seizure of personal assets. The fiduciary duty violations alone carry penalties that could bankrupt Vivian and her co-conspirators, turning their suburban power trip into a federal case study in white-collar crime. Vivian's final desperate act involves attempting to file an emergency restraining order against me, claiming I threatened violence during our recorded meeting where she tried bribing me with stolen water rights. She tries to get the county to condemn my cabin as a public safety hazard, citing fabricated reports about structural instability and fire danger. Her organization of a protest march through the valley to protect community safety attracts exactly 12 participants, most of them HOA board members and their immediate family members. My preparation for the final showdown includes scheduling a press conference for the day before the HOA annual meeting, arranging water quality testing to disprove contamination claims, and coordinating with county officials to ensure public safety during what promises to be a contentious confrontation. The comprehensive evidence presentation I prepare for residents includes timeline documentation, financial analysis, and legal briefs explaining mineral rights in language that doesn't require a law degree to understand. Community mobilization reaches unprecedented levels as over 40 Valley residents plan to attend the HOA meeting as observers. Local media confirms coverage of the annual meeting confrontation, and County Supervisor Santos agrees to make an official statement about proper development procedures and water rights law. Environmental groups organize a peaceful demonstration supporting my watershed protection efforts, creating a circus atmosphere that Vivian never anticipated when she started this fight. Pre-meeting tension escalates when an anonymous bomb threat gets called in to the county building hosting the meeting, forcing relocation to a larger venue that can accommodate public interest and media coverage. Extra security arranged by the Sheriff's Department includes deputies trained in crowd control and evidence preservation, since everyone expects this confrontation to generate lawsuits and possibly criminal charges. My final evidence compilation represents 3 years of meticulous documentation, a complete timeline of harassment with photo and video evidence, financial analysis showing HOA corruption and mismanagement, legal briefs explaining mineral rights and water access authority, and testimony from 12 Valley residents documenting systematic intimidation. The smell of fresh printer paper and binding glue fills Patricia's office as we prepare exhibits that will destroy Vivian's credibility in front of cameras and witnesses. Vivian's last-minute maneuvers include attempting to exclude non-HOA residents from the meeting, trying to limit public comment to 5 minutes total, calling for secret ballot votes on all HOA business, and bringing additional private security to maintain order during proceedings. Her desperation tastes like victory as I realize she understands exactly how badly this is going to end for her. The emotional stakes couldn't be higher as this confrontation determines whether my valley becomes a model of community cooperation or remains under the control of corrupt tyrants who mistake HOA positions for actual authority. Multiple families' homes and livelihoods hang in the balance. Vivian's reputation and financial future depend on controlling the narrative, and the battle between community values and developer greed reaches its climax. Time to show Vivian Blackwood what happens when federal law meets small-town corruption in front of television cameras. The Valley Community Center is packed beyond capacity with standing room only and the smell of nervous sweat mixing with camera lights and industrial carpet cleaner. Local TV news crews have their equipment positioned for maximum dramatic effect. County Supervisor Santos sits in the front row with a legal pad full of notes, and Sheriff Martinez stations deputies at strategic locations around the room. 83 residents plus media fill every available seat, creating an atmosphere that feels more like a town hall uprising than a routine HOA meeting. Vivian attempts to control the meeting agenda from the moment she gavels the session to order, trying to exclude me from speaking and limit discussion to HOA business only. The County Supervisor Santos intervenes immediately, citing California's Brown Act and public interest requirements that make this a matter of legal transparency rather than private club politics. The tension in the room becomes palpable as Vivian realizes she's lost control before the meeting even begins, her perfectly applied makeup already showing stress cracks under the television lights. My formal presentation of evidence begins with a timeline of harassment that draws audible gasps from the audience as I display security footage of trespassing, attempted break-ins, and property damage. The revelation of mineral rights ownership hits the room like a thunderclap when I produce the original 1961 federal land grant showing that I own subsurface rights to the entire valley floor, not just my 40 acres. But the mic drop moment comes when I reveal Vivian's husband's construction company connection and their systematic campaign to steal $2.3 million in mineral resources through intimidation and fraud. Ladies and gentlemen, I announce, holding up the geological survey results, for 3 years the Blackwood family has been trying to force me off my property so they can access gravel deposits worth more than most of you paid for your homes. This was never about cabin aesthetics or community standards. This was about theft. Vivian's desperate defense crumbles as she claims I'm lying about property ownership and mineral rights, despite documentary evidence projected on screens throughout the room. She accuses me of trying to destroy property values and community safety through extremist environmental agenda, her voice rising to near shrieking levels as she realizes the audience isn't buying her victim narrative. When Patricia presents evidence of embezzled HOA funds, Vivian breaks down completely, claiming she was protecting the community by using resident fees to fight my terrorism. Law enforcement response is swift and decisive as County Prosecutor James Chen announces the formal investigation into HOA financial crimes. Sheriff Martinez serves a warrant for complete HOA financial records dating back to the organization's formation, and a restraining order gets issued against Vivian's security patrol activities. Criminal charges are filed for harassment, intimidation, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners, while federal authorities express interest in the civil rights violations. The community reaction is explosive and cathartic as residents give a standing ovation when I explain that water access will be restored immediately through fair easement agreements that protect everyone's rights. 3 HOA board members resign on the spot rather than face criminal liability. Residents demand immediate refunds of illegal special assessments, and a unanimous vote of no confidence removes Vivian from the HOA presidency permanently. Media coverage captures everything in real time as Channel 7's live broadcast shows Vivian's complete breakdown and admission that she used community funds for personal legal battles. Reporter Sarah Martinez interviews Valley residents about years of harassment and intimidation, while Patricia explains mineral rights law for viewers across Southern California. The story gets picked up by national news outlets as a textbook example of HOA overreach and corruption. My gracious victory speech focuses on healing rather than revenge as I announce immediate restoration of water access for all residents, propose fair water sharing agreements that protect everyone's legal rights, and offer to sell gravel to the county at cost for road improvement projects. I commit a portion of mineral rights profits to establishing a valley conservation fund that will protect our watershed and wildlife habitat for future generations. The knowledge sharing continues as Patricia explains to television cameras that federal homestead mineral rights supersede local zoning authority, meaning original land grants often include rights that trump HOA covenants completely. She details HOA board fiduciary duties and personal liability for mismanaging community funds, emphasizing that board members can face criminal charges for embezzling money that belongs to residents. Vivian's final humiliation plays out in front of rolling cameras as she gets handcuffed and arrested for embezzlement. Her husband's construction company loses county contracts due to corruption investigations, and personal assets get frozen pending restitution to defrauded HOA members. She's facing 3 to 5 years in prison plus $500,000 in civil penalties, while her reputation becomes synonymous with HOA abuse in legal textbooks. Community healing begins immediately as the new HOA board gets elected with transparency and accountability as core principles. Valley residents organize a community barbecue to celebrate the resolution, and local businesses report increased support from grateful neighbors who finally feel free to speak their minds without fear of retaliation. The taste of victory is sweet, but the real satisfaction comes from knowing that justice served publicly protects everyone. Water access gets fully restored within 48 hours of the meeting, and the relief in residents' voices when their taps start flowing again sounds like a community exhaling after holding its breath for months. The county fast-tracks its investigation into HOA development violations, discovering that 3 other developments in Riverside County used similar tactics to bypass environmental regulations. Vivian pleads guilty to embezzlement and conspiracy charges, receiving 18 months in federal prison plus full restitution to HOA members, while her husband's construction company files for bankruptcy after losing every government contract they'd counted on. My transformation from burned-out tech consultant to community advocate feels as natural as the morning mist rolling through our valley pines. The cabin completion gets celebrated with a valley-wide housewarming party where neighbors bring covered dishes and stories about overcoming their own HOA nightmares. I become the unofficial advocate for property rights in rural communities across California, featured speaker at County Planning Commission meetings, and author of a blog documenting HOA overreach stories that generates over 100,000 monthly readers nationwide. Community benefits multiply like ripples in our creek as the Valley Conservation Fund gets established with $200,000 from mineral rights profits, creating an annual scholarship program for local high school students, and funding a community garden on the shared water access easement where residents grow vegetables and friendship in equal measure. Valley residents form a mutual aid network for future challenges, proving that real community strength comes from neighbors helping neighbors rather than HOA boards wielding imaginary authority over people's lives. The knowledge legacy spreads beyond our valley as the county updates its development permit process to require mineral rights verification before approving any subdivision, preventing future developers from building on resources they don't own. My experience becomes a case study that Patricia uses in her environmental law practice, teaching other attorneys that federal land grants create property rights that supersede state and local authority completely. The state legislature considers a bill strengthening homestead mineral rights protection, with my story cited as evidence that original federal grants need modern legal protection. Personal healing happens gradually as I find peace and purpose in protecting my grandfather's legacy while developing meaningful friendships with neighbors who understand the value of land, water, and freedom from petty tyrants. The sustainable cabin becomes a model for off-grid living workshops that attract visitors from across the country. And the book I write about standing up to institutional bullying becomes required reading in several law school courses about property rights and community organizing. Economic impact reverberates throughout the valley as Hillcrest Estates property values recover once the corruption investigation concludes and residents realize they're living in a community where property rights are actually respected. Ethical development projects get welcomed with proper environmental review processes that protect our watershed while creating sustainable jobs. Local businesses thrive as community tension dissolves and people feel free to support neighbors without fear of HOA retaliation. Gravel extraction provides steady revenue for valley improvements while maintaining environmental standards that preserve our natural beauty. Environmental success stories multiply as the Watershed Protection Plan gets adopted by county planning departments throughout Southern California, native plant restoration projects get funded by conservation grants, and a solar energy cooperative forms among valley residents who want to share clean power resources. My cabin gets featured in Sustainable Living magazine as an example of how individual property rights and environmental protection can work together when communities cooperate instead of fighting. Justice continues serving as Vivian completes her full sentence and pays complete restitution to HOA members, while 3 former board members face ongoing civil penalties for enabling corruption. The private security company faces multiple lawsuits for harassment and trespassing, and their business license gets revoked by the state after our case exposes systematic civil rights violations across multiple communities. Future adventures begin when I receive calls from property owners in Colorado, Montana, and Oregon facing similar harassment campaigns from HOA boards that mistake covenants for constitutional authority. County supervisors ask me to testify before the state legislature about HOA reform legislation, and a documentary filmmaker contacts me about acquiring rights to tell our story on a national platform. The closing message resonates in my grandfather's voice every morning when I sit on the cabin porch with coffee and watch the sun rise over land that belongs to our family forever. Sometimes standing up to bullies requires patience, strategy, and community support, but legal knowledge is power, and small communities can overcome corporate greed when good people refuse to be intimidated by fake authority. If you've dealt with HOA nightmares, share your stories in the comments below, hit subscribe for more David versus Goliath justice stories, and let me know what other battles against corrupt systems you want to hear next, because one person's courage can inspire entire communities to demand accountability from the petty tyrants who forgot that real power comes from serving people, not controlling them.